Hello, I'm Ibrahim Imam, and welcome to this episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. In this episode, we will continue our exploration of hemorrhagic stroke, and we'll have a perspective of someone who has written about her experience of the condition and also has a background in the neuroscience of the brain. And today I'll be speaking to Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who narrated her experience of stroke in her now classic memoir titled My Stroke of Insight. This documented her experience of stroke as well as the 8-year recovery that followed, and it spent 63 weeks on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, and it is still routinely the #1 book in that category of stroke in the Amazon marketplace. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor is a Harvard-trained and published neuroscientist, and is also a teacher and public speaker who loves educating all age groups, academic levels, corporations, virtually every sector that needs educating about the brain, which she calls beautiful. She focuses on how we can activate the power of our neuroplasticity to not only recover from neurological trauma, but how we can purposely choose to live a more flexible, resilient, and satisfying life. In 2008, Dr. Taylor gave the first TED Talk that ever went viral on the internet, and this has now had well over 27.5 million views. My podcast will hopefully aim for that. And also in 2008, Dr. Taylor was chosen as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, and was the premier guest on Oprah Winfrey's Soul Series webcast. Oprah, if you're listening to this, I would like to follow in Dr. Taylor's footsteps. Her new book, which we will discuss later, is Whole Brain Living, and is a #1 release on Amazon in categories ranging from neuroscience to nervous system diseases and stroke. Dr. Taylor, welcome to the Neurology Lounge podcast. I'm very grateful that you honored my invitation and that you could join me today.
I am thrilled to be with you. You talk about things that just make my little heart go pitter-pat. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. I know you wanted to share your experience of stroke. Was that the only reason you wrote the book, or did you have other?
I thought that first of all, I thought people would find it informative to watch the brain deteriorate through the eyes of a neuroanatomist. So I study the brain as a neuroanatomist, and which means I think about cells and how cells are organized, and then how different cells produce certain functions. And it was a fascinating experience for me to literally watch my own brain go offline circuit by circuit by circuit. And it's a very compelling story because it is written through the eyes of a scientist, but also just through the eyes of a human who is experiencing stroke, which is our #1 disabler on our planet. And for me, I was an educator before. I was at Harvard. I was teaching and performing research. So I care about people and how they relate to their own brain, because it is this precious and beautiful thing, especially when it's working well. But when it's not working well, what is going on at the level of the cells? And how can I then think in terms of recovery and healing? It's not based on me, a woman. It's based on the health and the well-being of my cells. So, it was a different way of looking at stroke in a way that people could actually understand.
In other words, to show how we understand the brain better when it is not functioning properly. Is that the kind of?
Well, and the counter to that is through understanding the brain when it's not functioning properly. What does that mean about when these parts are functioning? What is healthy?
And how did you write it? Did you write it as you were recovering, or did you kind of give it some time before you reflected and decided to put pen to paper?
As I was walking out of Mass General Hospital, my neurologist, Dr. Ann Young, said to me, "Jill, this is the kind of thing great books are written about." And she just planted that seed. And I thought, that is true. And I thought, but I need to write about the morning of the stroke as soon as possible, but I didn't have language. And I had a very small worldview because I had had this major trauma that had wiped out my left hemisphere. So I could still embody the morning of the stroke, and I could remember that video of the experience of the morning of the stroke. I just didn't have language for it. So in the first 2 years after the stroke, it was really important to me to write it down as best as possible so that I had that. And then I could get a bigger worldview and kind of forget some of the details, but that would be okay because I already had the morning of the stroke. And to me, I thought if people just read the morning of the stroke, which was the natural deterioration of the brain, I thought that they'd be able to then deduce what is normal or what was the hole that has now broken down, and then how would we rebuild that. But as time went on, I actually kept on my office and my home wall a huge piece of paper. And every time something new came back online, I put a date and I made a note to myself. Like, I didn't know what a number was for 4 years. I mean, people would say, Jill, what's 1 + 1? And I'd be looking around for, well, what's a 1? What's a 1? I just didn't have an abstract concept of what a 1 was. And they'd go, a 1, a 1, it's everything. And I'd think to myself, well, if a 1 is everything, then how can you have another 1? I mean, it made no sense, right? And so that circuitry didn't come online for numbers for 4 years. So I put a date and I put numbers. 1 + 1 = 2. Oh my gosh, it makes sense. So I just kept this list. And then somewhere along the line, I sat down and I really started writing the storyline of the recovery. But I couldn't write about recovery until I was recovered. So I did a lot of the book in the beginning on orchestrating the rescue and the morning of the stroke, all that. I did that early, and then I set it aside. And then I went, a university here invited private engineering university, invited me to teach anatomy. Just basic anatomy, and then some physiology and neuroscience to engineers, because it was the era when we were moving into bioengineering and they wanted that information. And I said, okay. So what I did was I actually relearned the terminology of my anatomy and physiology and neuroscience in order to teach it, because the right hemisphere, I understood. I had a complete 3-dimensional picture of the body and the blood and the neurons and the connections and the function, but I didn't have any language for it because that's what got wiped out with the stroke. And so teaching those courses gave me the terminology back. And then it was like, okay, now I can actually go get a real job and feed myself again, because, I completely was disabled and needed to rebuild and feed myself. And then over 8 years, the course of 8 years, I felt completely recovered because I was working circuit by circuit by circuit, ability. And when I felt that I was a solid again, separate from the whole, no longer just a big energy ball, that's when I decided, that was the first thing to go for me. It was the last thing to get back. And when I got it back, I decided, okay, the brain has now healed. And now I can take this new mass of what I am, finish this book, write about recovery. And then it was like, well, I got a few things to say. I learned a few things. And so the last few chapters are actually me taking the privilege of sharing what I felt I learned through the eyes of a scientist having this experience.
Yeah, it's a perspective, a unique one, being a scientist and a patient experiencing it. And going back, you bled into the left hemisphere from an AVM, an arteriovenous malformation, and you said it erupted unexpectedly. Some of these AVMs are familial. Is there a family history at all? Was there nothing at all to indicate that
I wondered that too. We did not have anyone else who had had a hemorrhage. However, in my neurology book, I'm not a neurologist, you are. As I looked in, because I was teaching neuroanatomy at the Indiana University School of Medicine after the stroke, and I found this book on neurology and symptoms. And so I actually looked up what happens to that specific area, which was the middle cerebral artery. I had too much blood there. I had an arteriovenous malformation, which means it's like varicose veins in there, too much blood. What would happen if there wasn't enough blood there? What if that was removed for some reason? And what I read blew my mind, because it said, it results in symptoms that look a lot like schizophrenia. Well, I have a brother diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I've never believed that he had traditional schizophrenia, because he doesn't respond as much to the antipsychotic medications. He responds to things like Depakote, which are more temporal lobe epilepsy medications. So if he passes before I do, I will be looking at his brain in order to see if in that specific area, maybe in our genes, mine had a malformation for too much blood, and maybe in his brain he had a malformation for too little. And I think that would be highly significant in the world of psychiatry if that turns out to be the case.
So your symptoms started with this sharp, piercing pain, and then from your description, it's almost as if it evolved in a kind of a slow motion. Can you tell me what happened?
I was at home. It was first thing in the morning, and literally as soon as I sat up from sleeping, as soon as I sat up, this pain came behind my left eye. So it was and I have always had very low blood pressure. I'm typically 90/60. So I'm just a good low blood pressure kind of girl. And as soon as I sat up, as soon as you do that, the blood pressure goes up. And because I had this vulnerability, for some reason, it was just enough to pop it. And it popped, but it was a small bleed. And so over time, not much time, but over a couple of hours, it literally took 2 to 3 hours for there to be enough seepage. But where it happened was right in the temporal parietal area of the left hemisphere. So the first thing to go was first this pain. And then really, as I'm getting up, I immediately have this sensation of hypersensitivity to light. So I remember closing those blinds in both my bedroom and then the exercise room. And I thought, okay, it's very unusual for me I was, knock on wood, very healthy. So it was very unusual for me to have headaches. That wasn't an ongoing thing for me, except I did have occasionally a migraine headache, a severe migraine headache, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe no times in a year. So it wasn't debilitating, but I knew the migraine experience. And but so I got onto this exercise machine, and that's when I literally was looking at my hands, and they looked like claws. And there was this kind of disembodiment of the body on the machine, and me looking at this body through eyes of detachment. I don't know what this is. All I know is this is what my consciousness is attached to, but it was a complete shift away from normal perception of reality. And then off we went into a slow progression of deterioration. And of course, I'm looking at my experiences through the eyes of a neuroanatomist, not a neurologist. Now, if I'd been a neurologist, I'd be on the phone probably, right? 911, I got a problem here. But I'm a neuroanatomist. I'm fascinated by neurological weirdness, which is what I call it. And I've never done the drugs or, the psilocybin or the psychedelics. I've never done any of that. But but I'm still fascinated with the human experience. So to me, I think I had a disadvantage that morning because I was so fascinated with it instead of just act. But I think I had an advantage because I understood so much neuro for the process of recovery.
Yeah, because you described how your brain was adjusting and readjusting. Could you literally experience this, or was this something you were interpreting based on your knowledge?
No, it was all I had. When I was walking across the room after I got off the machine, when I was looking at my hands and I could tell this is big, and I'm walking, then I get off and I walk across the living room to go to go take a shower because I still think I'm going to work. I remember I had to consciously tell my right leg to move, left leg, move. So I become very rigid and very unstable. And the fluidity was completely gone, the fluidity of my movement patterning. And I had to concentrate on it. And I remember, this was so bizarre, but I remember lifting my leg to get into the shower. And it was literally as though, and I'm a neuroanatomist, but I'm a gross anatomist. So, I teach gross anatomy, but I taught a lot of anatomy through my graduate years. So, muscles, origins and insertions, which muscles perform. I taught kinesiology. So this was my thing, right? And I could literally hear this machine saying, okay, you guys, you muscles, you contract, and you muscles, you release. And in order to, like a robot, get that leg into the tub. And as I progressed, and then I got into the tub, the shower, and I pulled on the water, and the water hit the tub, and it resonated, this loud volume of noise, and it was like, it literally knocked me back. It was so amplified, and it knocked me over. I was so unstable, and I'm leaning up against that shower wall, and I'm literally observing my arm against the wall, and all the atoms and molecules of all of it was just one big blend of atoms and molecules. There was no definition of me, the individual. Now, again, you got to understand, I'm a neuroanatomist, so I think this is fascinating, right? No, there were brain cells that could do that, right? Or that there was, in the absence of brain cells, that this would be the experience, because we're not taught that, right? That's a whole different level of understanding of the brain. And then it was like, I got a problem. And so then I get out of the tub, and that's the beauty of my stroke of insight, is I take you through those 3 chapters of moment by moment by moment, what the experience was. And that's what I think that's why the TED Talk, it was the first TED Talk that ever went viral. And it was because, what's people's greatest fears is losing their mind. And here's this brain scientist taking you moment by moment of losing her mind. And then what I gained in knowledge and understanding about us as humanity because of this experience. So it's a pretty cool story.
It's interesting, partly because you went beyond the physical symptoms we associate with stroke. We're taught, the speech and the weakness. But you talked, your symptoms were, I want to say, spiritual, or...
just think about it. This is what I firmly believe. I believe that every ability we have is because we have brain cells that perform that function. So if I have the ability to speak, it's because I have brain cells that perform that function. If I can move anything motor, it's because I have brain cells that perform that function. And if I have a spiritual experience, it's because I have brain cells that perform that function. So I'm not having a spiritual experience usually when I'm in my left hemisphere, rational thinking brain interacting with the external world, right? I'm busy. That part of my brain is busy. It's dominant in our society. We value language and expertise. So we cram pack it with all those beautiful books you have behind you. right? And then we become an authority, right? And when we're being an authority, we're not being spiritual. We're being an authority. Even if we're being an authority on spirituality, we're being one or the other, right? There is no language in the spiritual experience. When I feel connected to the bigger picture of the energy around me as an energy ball, I have to quiet the language because the language is a distraction away from the present moment. And when I'm actually in the present moment connected to the bigger picture, I lose the boundaries, the perception of boundaries of where I begin and where I end. So that group of cells is being quieted. And so as we look at the neuroanatomy of the brain and these different groups of cells that do these different things, then it's like, well, there's a group of cells that's reaching across, inhibiting a comparable group of cells, or vice versa. Right. But there's always some group that is dominating another group. Sounds like, world politics, doesn't it? And in many ways, it's very similar, but we won't go there. So, so getting to know what's going on in the right hemisphere when the left hemisphere cells that are language and expertise and how we interact with the external world and how we define things, which is what medicine is built on. It's built on how do we communicate about these things, and then what do we need to do with language and with things from the external world in order to have this healing happen. It was, it offered me an insight into these two very different realms of being. And when the left hemisphere was going offline because of the hemorrhage, well, what did I have left? Well, its inhibitions came off of the right hemisphere, and I had blissful euphoria in the present moment where I experienced myself to be as big as the universe because I have to have those cells in the left hemisphere to define the boundaries of where I begin and where I end. I mean, it all makes sense.
Yeah. Some people talk about the tyranny of the left hemisphere. It's kind of suppressing the right. But what you are saying is that the two kind of work to keep things in balance. And now that the left hemisphere is offline, you had this feeling of tranquil euphoria, sense of peace. Would all like to experience this, isn't it?
It's lovely there.
Yeah, but you can.
I mean, because it's in the present moment. In order for me to have anxiety, I'm usually having anxiety about something I'm thinking about from the past or projecting into the future. Right. So I'm not really in the present moment because I'm freaking out about something in some other temporality. But if I'm truly right here with you, if you and I simply sit right here in the presence of one another, we can approach one another with the skills of the right hemisphere, which is curiosity and openness and possibilities. And those come with affect and emotion and feeling and an experiential of, oh, I think you're a delicious human being because, oh my gosh, we have possibilities. What can we create together? How can we share? How can we simply appreciate one another, appreciate our differences so that we can each grow from one another? So yeah, we have these mindsets based on groups of cells inside of the brain.
Interesting how they do what they do. So you have this feeling of tranquility, blessedness, euphoria, omniscience. Do you think that feeling hindered you from acting on what was actually going on?
When you're in blissful euphoria, you're not seeking something else. And because the left hemisphere was offline, that's where me, the individual, Jill Bolte Taylor, exist in a group of cells. And that group of cells defines the boundaries of where I begin and end as an individual. And it also relates me through language and information to the external world. So when all of that was swimming in a pool of blood, none of that had any matter to me. All that mattered was in the absence of that, this was what I had. And I was very fortunate that it was a slow bleed. I truly believe if it was a fast bleed, I'd have been gone, 25 years ago. But because it was slow, I could waft off into the right hemisphere. and then be in this blissful euphoria. And then that left hemisphere would pull me back online and say, we got a problem. We need help. We got to do something. Let's have some action. And then I'd go off back into blissful euphoria, and then eventually I'd land again. And it's a page turner. I mean,
No, I
it was a great experience in its own way.
yeah, I mean the idea of no physical boundaries. I wonder whether, I know you'd say you don't do drugs and all that. People who do, is that what happens, do you think, when they take these psychedelics? Does that suppress the left hemisphere and allows the right
Yeah.
loom, so to say?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, but on top of that, the difference between the psychedelic journey and my experience was that I did not hallucinate.
No.
I didn't have the colors and the dance. I didn't have all that. I didn't have any of that. All I had was, I'm an energy ball made up of energy, atoms and molecules in space. I couldn't define the boundaries of where I began. So my perception of myself was literally as big as the universe, because energy is energy and it all is interconnected. But I do think that a lot of people are interested in taking the psychedelic journey in order to shift their perception away from the left emotional group of cells that they have, which is where this linear trauma from our past exists, and in order to get lifted out of that into whatever this is, and then to come back and look at all the trauma from the past and say, I'm just hooked into a group of circuits inside of my left hemisphere, and I can kind of release that because I've been giving it all this power. It's been running so intensely in my life that it has underlined everything in my world. And it's like, okay, the power of that circuit to run, because the thing about circuits, this is, the more they run, the stronger they get, and then they begin to run on their own and become habitual. So if I am hooked in my trauma at a young age and I'm repeating the trauma, then the trauma becomes the foundation upon which my whole life then is built. And if I can help take away the power of that circuitry, well, we have 3/4 of our brain that's really, really healthy. Our cognition, I don't have trauma in 1 + 1 = 2. Right? Most of us, we don't have trauma there, or we don't have trauma when we're at the grocery store picking out our vegetables, right? We're simply there processing data and information. So the trauma is inside of this group of cells, and also in the present moment, my trauma is not right here, right now. If I have a trauma from my past, and of course we all do, because we're living beings, but if I'm still 30 years ago when something horrible happened to me, I'm not right here, right now. And the right hemisphere doesn't have a past and a future. The left hemisphere does. It's the beauty of the left hemisphere, linearity across time, which means we can learn and we can grow from past experience, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel in every moment, because we'd all be instantly dead because we're alive. Right. I mean, so this brain and the way it organizes itself is this beautiful, beautiful instrument. And the better we get to use this, understand what these cells actually do, and how we have the power to choose moment by moment who and how we want to be based on our understanding of these groups of cells. So I'm so pro-human, I'm so pro-life in this manifestation and our ability to really help heal ourselves. So I'm not an advocate for the psychedelics, because I think, well, psychedelics, what do? They result in the brain's response to trauma, right? They cause neuroplasticity. They may cause neurogenesis. Well, that's what happens when you traumatize the brain. So I'm not interested in people traumatizing their brain cells in order to help themselves heal. I think they can do that in other ways that don't actually hurt the brain.
Your experience kind of reminds me of meditation. People who can meditate and talk about the way the monks can can get out of the physical and just go into the spiritual. Is that kind of a similar thing that, I mean, have they found a secret to enhance the right hemisphere and suppress, even if it's just for the moment, suppress the left?
There are all kinds of tools that people are using in order to do that. And Andrew Newberg, Dr. Andrew Newberg, did some work with a spectrometer, a spec machine, and he took a group of nurses. He took a group of nuns and he took a group of monks and said, go into the spectrometer and pray or meditate. And when you find God or you find whatever that eternal bliss is, tug on this line. And we'll take some pictures of your brain and see what's going on. And he really thought he would find a God center. You know, where's God in the brain? And what he showed instead was a silencing of the left hemisphere. And as the language centers in the left hemisphere became quiet, then it opened up, it took the inhibition off of that right hemisphere thinking groups of cells, and they had this experience of openness. So I think it's appropriate to say, if I'm going to meditate, what is in the way? Which groups of cells, which skill sets are in the way of me being able to find this blissful euphoria? And blissful euphoria is a right here, right now. It's not in the past. It's not in the future. Prayer is not in the past. Love is not in the past, not in the future. It's right here, right now, right? So setting down that left hemisphere, setting down me, the ego group of cells in that left hemisphere that define the boundaries of where I am and keep me constricted, setting that aside and stepping into the consciousness of the present moment and allowing my heart to open, my perception to expand, and just the awareness of the present moment. Instantly, there's an instant shift in how I feel, right? Because I'm in the present, and how I feel in the present is generally very different than my perception of myself in the past, which is where all that trauma is, or in the future, which is where I'm projecting my trauma into and my fears. So you know, we're just this elegant design, and yeah, it's just all yummy.
It's the brain is fascinating. That's why we are both in
Yeah.
in the brain. So while all this was happening, you said you were concurrently disturbed and fascinated, and you talked about how your left hemisphere kept trying to put you back on track. How much of your action at that time, how much of your actions at that time were voluntary, and how much was the brain actually trying to formulate a plan?
I think that for me, there was such a distinction between present moment blissful euphoria. I had no concern, no sense of urgency, no interest in getting help because that's somewhere not in the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is caring about all that, and it's got to set a plan, and it's got to do A, B, and C in order to get there, and it's got to attend to details in the external world like a telephone and numbers, and those were like swimming in a pool of blood. And so keeping track of things, and that's why it took so long, a couple of hours. I haven't read that book in a long time, but it took hours for me to actually get help and get rescued. So and that was because I would waft off into the present moment where, you know, I was just in blissful euphoria. How cool is this? Wow, I'm alive. Wow. I mean, just the concept of wow, I'm alive. I mean, how often do we actually just get lost in that concept of wow, I'm alive. I'm made up of 50 trillion molecular geniuses that all have this magnificent DNA, and they all work together in order for me to be a human. And oh my gosh. And so that's where I was in the present. And then, then I would shift back into, oh my God, I'm having a problem. I need to connect with reality. I need to make a phone call. And then it was like, get the job done.
Interesting. So this left-right hemisphere theme, of course, goes through the book. I'm just wondering, maybe in evolutionary terms, how how the left became so dominant? Was it because it has a survival advantage, or is there any
I don't
reason?
think so at all. I think it was language.
Just okay.
You know, language is a skill of that left hemisphere. There's a beautiful book, The Master and His Emissary, by the good Dr. Ian McGilchrist. He's UK also. And what he has done in this book is he has taken like this last 70 years of basic science in the lab, looking at bird brains, looking at mammal brains, looking at reptiles, and identifying the differences between the hemispheres across these different kinds of species, and how the right hemisphere has come to process a bigger picture perspective where it's actually biologically programmed. If I'm an eagle and I'm soaring, I'm need to, you know, keep track of the big, and yet I need to know where that prairie dog is for dinner, right? And so I have other cells in the left hemisphere that allow me to focus down and go and get that detail. So we look at what his book looks at is all this research, basic science over the decades. And I love this book because it just lines up with everything I believe in. I take it one step further in that I experienced different personality characters. My right here, right now personality character, of course, is very different. If I'm as big as the universe connected to all that is, that's a very different part of me than if I'm in my pain from the past, which is very different from the ability to have experience in the present moment, which is very different from my left rational thinking brain. I mean, we have these 4 very specific modules of cells that have very specific skill sets. And when they get wiped out, they get wiped out. But back to your question, as soon as language became so dominant, I mean, just think about it. How many hundreds of years ago did we not read? We didn't read. The general public didn't read. Priests read to us, right? So a very small percentage of the population was all about language. Well, now we don't just read, we write, we speak, we read books. I mean, the language circuitry is so complex inside of that left hemisphere. And in order to get up the ladder in our social construct of, you know, the typical Western world, we become experts. Well, how do we become experts? One, we have language, and with language, we have all this knowledge, and we have all this knowledge that comes out of our mouth. So you wouldn't be speaking to me today, probably, if I didn't have this language and this knowledge, right? Because now I become an authority, and the more authority we have, the higher our education, the higher our paychecks, the bigger our houses, the whatever. So it's a natural construct of our society in order to be more left brain. Now, you will have a few right brain people who have accumulated and manifested a lot of the physical, but that's generally not what they so much, you know, value. Depends on what's really going on there. But because what they value is the peaceful heart, the peaceful connection, the loving, open spirit, and that to them is wealth as opposed to money in the bank.
That's an interesting concept. I'll come back to practical things as far as medicine is concerned. And one of the things you talked about was the inability of the medical community to know how to communicate with someone in condition. What shortcomings did you experience from healthcare providers when you were kind of going through this at the beginning?
Well, I think you said it already. You said, you know, what we look at are these physical things. Is there language? Well, if there's not language, That doesn't mean I'm not there. It means I cannot communicate with you through language. So are you sophisticated enough to communicate with me in what I am, in what I still have? Or is it simply because I can't, or even, I'm going to pick on neurology a little bit. My most hated thing in the world is squeeze my hand.
Okay.
Squeeze my hand, right?
We love
Because squeeze my hand, all that tells you is whether or not the circuits, the group of cells in my brain that control motor control of that hand are working or not. And it's like, I am so much more than my muscular system. And if my muscular system, so then if I can't, and then another thing, okay, here's my other pet peeve for neurology. I'm sorry, I'm picking on you. Is okay, I'm going to say three things to you now, and then you're laughing because this is true. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you what they were. And I'm thinking that's a tiny group of cells inside of my language centers. And if I can't communicate with you the way you're used to communicating in the superiority of being a normal healthy left brain, if I don't have those skill sets, then you even wonder if I'm conscious. And it's like, I'm looking at you people thinking you're a bunch of idiots because you have no idea how to communicate with where I am. So if now you take away language, and you take away that motor system, and you take away, the squeeze my hand is gone, all of the things that you asked me to do, and then you look at me as this lump in the bed and wonder if I'm even conscious, and I'm in here thinking, oh my God, I am so screwed because you guys have no idea how to fix me when you can't even communicate with me. And then you dismiss me. And then you say, she's hopeless, put her in a nursing home. She's vegetative. Her life has no value. And I'm over here going, hey, I got a few circuits offline and I could use a little help. And first of all, I'm in no hurry because my cells are in no hurry. Now, society is in a hurry. And so society says, okay, well, she has some motor problems, so we're going to give her some physical therapy. And as long as she achieves and she gets better, then she'll get more physical therapy, right? And so people come in and I have a problem. I have a disconnect between the neurons in my brain, anatomy, and the motor skills over here, the motor cells that are going to go to those muscles in order to make them function. And so I'm over here, you're saying, squeeze my hand. And I'm thinking to myself, squeeze my hand, squeeze my hand, squeeze my hand. What's a hand? And what's a squeeze? What's a squeeze? And so I might spend 24, 36, or 72 hours trying to figure out what's a hand? What's a hand? And it's like, okay, everybody's holding my hand and say, squeeze your hand. Okay, so the hand is over there. And it's like, and so I'm trying to figure out internally, how do I get connected from a traumatized cellular circuit into that thing way down there. Now, this is like miles away if you don't know where it is, right? And so finally, I figure out what a hand is, and I'm going, oh, my hand, oh, my God. Okay, I found the hand. And then it's like squeeze, and it's like, well, that's another whole circuit. Right. So now I got to start over and I got to figure out, well, what's a squeeze? What's a squeeze? What's a squeeze? So then somebody comes in, mom comes in and I squeeze her hand spontaneously. I squeeze her hand because, oh my God, I have figured out what is a hand and what is a squeeze. And I squeeze mom's hand and mom's going, oh my God, she squeezed my hand. She squeezed my hand. And then the doctors come in and say, oh, that was a reflex.
Because she didn't.
Exactly. Now, what's the message I receive as a patient? I receive the why did I put all that work in? Why did I try so hard for all that time? Why did I work so hard when I'm in this debilitated, ill condition, exhausted, the brain cells aren't working, and I have now worked so hard to do what you asked me to do, but I wasn't on your timetable. Right. So those are the kinds of complaints I have about the world of neurology.
Well, that's
and recovery.
that's food for thought. As you are saying that, I can picture myself having done that hundreds of times.
Yeah.
You also remarked about the attitude and behaviors of your carers, both good and
Yeah.
bad practice.
Right.
What did you find most commendable of the good doctors and nurses you saw?
The good doctors came in and they knew I was a stroke survivor. And they did not expect me to have language because they knew that circuit was off. They didn't expect me to squeeze a hand because they knew that circuit was off. They didn't expect me to do all these things because those circuits were off. And what they did was they came in and they touched me appropriately. They got in my face span so I could see and I could hear. They did not raise their voices. I am not deaf. I have aphasia. Big difference. They came down and they got in my face gently and they said, I got you. I got you. My job is to help you find your way back here. And they connected with me as a human. And in that space, I felt safe. This is a protector. This is a warrior who's going to not just, I'm just another thing on the thing and we're in a hurry and off we go. It's like, it was a connection. And as soon as the physician truly connected with me, I knew I was safe. And in their love, I could relax. And I could, because imagine what it's like to be me. I was a Harvard, person doing all this amazing stuff on this Harvard ladder. And now I am on my back. I am completely vulnerable. I have no language. I am completely paralyzed on the right side and total paresis. I feel like a ton of lead in the bed and I am going nowhere and I am doing nothing. But I am here completely 100% vulnerable to everything going on around me. I have no control. And do I have a teammate or not? And if I don't have a teammate, I'm terrified. I'm terrified. I have terror in my soul about these people have no clue how to communicate with me. And I literally felt like a soldering heap of waste because I needed to be loved. I needed to be connected with. I needed to be just somebody come and take your energy ball and put your energy in my energy ball and say, I got you, girl. I got you. And it doesn't matter if it takes 5 minutes or 5 years for you to learn how to have language. I got you. And otherwise, I am 100% completely vulnerable, and it is terrifying.
So a part of it is this rush, isn't it? Which there's a book called God's Hotel where the physician talked about slow medicine, that we've lost it. Everything is now fast. And what we really need is slow medicine.
I love it.
Our patients need slow medicine.
If you want people to heal, you got to go to where they are.
Yeah. And the other thing you talked about, let's bash medicine one more before we move on.
I'm doing it as gently and lovingly as possible.
And I think it's a lesson we need. And you talked about a hospital's number one responsibility should be protecting its patients' energy levels. And you thought a lot of the protocols we have in the hospital really drain the energy. What kind of things did you experience that you found draining and which we need to change?
Don't get me going. So I'll start with this though. When back in the 70s, 80s, we learned that a typical sleep cycle is between 90 and 110 minutes. An hour and a half. right? A sleep cycle. And in that sleep cycle, we documented REM sleep. And we've also documented that in the absence of REM sleep, people become psychotic. Normal people become psychotic when they're sleep deprived. So in the US, it is our policy to wake patients up every 60 minutes in order to take their vitals. And I'm asking myself, how is it that you learned all these medical doctors have already read in neuroscience books about the brain that a typical sleep cycle is 90 to 110 minutes? You know, I understand if this person is in a critical condition, and we need to make sure that they're conscious and they're not dead. You know, that there's some level of connection that can be made. I appreciate that, but for this to be a basic policy in medical worlds makes zero sense, and they know it, and I don't know why they do it, and it should stop. Because if you keep waking me up and sleep is when my brain shuts out all this incoming stimulation, and my internal systems can actually communicate with one another, cleanse themselves, send all the immune system in, get the lymphatics flowing, get blood flowing to clean everything out. Why wouldn't you let me do that?
Well, I have to say that's one lesson I took from your book, and I have put it into practice. So,
Thank you.
So we come to your rehab, which you said was slow and challenging. And you said recovery was a decision I had to make a million times a day. How
Yeah.
challenging was it then to go through through that process of getting back to yourself?
It was, literally 8 years of, I really thought about absolutely nothing other than rebuilding circuits. And because that's how I think in circuits. But in the beginning, the left hemisphere was a mess. I mean, literally, you got cells. Some of the cells have died. So you got cellular debris. You got all this blood left over from residual from a blood clot that was in there for 5 weeks. I mean, it's got a lot of garbage in it, biological garbage. Blood is toxic to neurons. So some of the neurons died in relationship to the blood. Some of them literally sheared off their dendrites and curled up in little balls and went to sleep. And it's like, I'm hiding, I'm protecting myself from what's out there. So it took a while for the debris to get cleaned up. And so those cells weren't functioning. I wasn't going to have language for quite a while. And as soon as the surgeons, I had surgery 2.5 weeks after the hemorrhage happened, but it was literally 2.5 more weeks of a absolutely completely silent mind, silent, no language, no me, no hi, no I like red, no nothing, no language, no voice, silent. And it was blissful. It was really, really blissful. It's non-functional, right? It's a completely vegetative way of functioning in the world where, again, language is how we communicate with one another. But I was still conscious, and I was still capable of living and learning in certain ways, but language wasn't one of those tools that I had to use. So it was painful. When you try to play the piano and you don't know how to play the piano, and you sit down and you try to get all those fingers going, it can be really painful. When you go out and you play pickleball for the first time and you're no good at it, it's painful. Whenever you try to learn anything and it doesn't come easily, it's painful. You gotta pay attention, and you gotta practice and you gotta learn all those left brain skills of how to hold this and how to do that and how to hold me. And we're busy. We got all these body parts that we have to get to work at the same time. So it was painful to try. So I had to be willing to try, and I didn't have to try. If you came into me and you were a physical therapist who, you're on your telephone and you're busy and you're kind of snarky and you're in a hurry and you're talking to this other person and I'm just kind of there, why am I going to give you my attention? Why am I going to work so hard with my precious energy to work so hard to focus on you and to give you something when you don't care? And I know you don't care because I have a right hemisphere, and my right hemisphere is looking at how you're holding your body, how you're behaving, how your connection isn't with me, and how, you're busy over there planning your wedding. Right in your own head. You don't care about what I'm doing. And it's like, I'm not going to show up for you because you haven't shown up for me. And why would I put all that effort in when it's not going to get me anything? Right. Except pain. So I think it's really, the PT people, speech people I responded to, were the people who came in and actually connected with me again. I mean, it's like, where's Jill? Okay, I'm working and I've got the insurance company list of all the things that Jill needs to be able to do in order to qualify for more PT, but she's got to do this. And so, and it's like, but what about Jill? What if that's way up here and I can only do this? It's like, what if I can barely make sound and you want me to make words, right? What is a word? A word is nothing other than a sound. And then you place a meaning on a sound. Well, that's way beyond anything I can do. So you got to go to me.
It's making that connection again, which is kind of key.
Yeah.
So, and you also attributed your recovery, which took time, to your knowledge of brain plasticity, knowing that the brain can repair, replace, and retrain its neural circuitry. Most people have this old concept that once it's gone, it's gone. Do you think the knowledge that the brain can repair itself helps that individual to improve, and those that don't know kind of don't improve as well? Is that?
I think it depends on different parts of the brain. Where's the trauma? What's the problem? If it has wiped out my motivation, what I have found is that many of the people who come to me with right brain trauma, they have very different problems than people who have left brain trauma. Everybody says, oh, good, the stroke happened in the right hemisphere or the trauma happened to the right hemisphere because now they still have language and they can still be functional human beings. But what I find is that because the right hemisphere is this internal richness of a world, and my ability to connect to, I'm an energy ball connected to energy, there's a peacefulness there that the left hemisphere doesn't have, because the left hemisphere is always in performance mode. Right. And doing while the right hemisphere is in the being. So it's generally, it depends on where the trauma is. I was fortunate that I wiped out my left hemisphere. If I could have a trauma, if I had to have a brain trauma, I would rather have a left brain trauma than a right brain trauma. Although I would lose language, people are trained in how to teach me language. Okay. If I have trauma to my right hemisphere, I can't read the facial expressions anymore. I can't read body language anymore. I can't feel connected to something that is bigger than me. I can live possibly okay without that. I won't be very spiritually satisfied, of course, because I can't find God. How many people have I had come to me and say, I can't find God? I'm just angry all the time because I can't find God. I used to have this really wonderful, peaceful, spiritual life, and now I can't do that. Well, that's because those brain cells that allow us that experience are now offline. So I think it's important that we really start looking at the brain, the whole brain, in relationship to itself, the different parts that thrive in different skill sets and offer us different rich skills of being a whole human, and then figuring out, okay, if this portion of the brain is traumatized, then that may really hit the motivation. And if the motivation is gone, what else is gone? And in the absence of motivation, well, what motivates us? Ability to focus on things, to see that there's something to put energy in, and we approach with curiosity. Well, if the circuitry in my brain that is curious is gone, I'm going to have probably a different recovery than otherwise. So we can't come in and say this is this and that is that, and this is, to me, it is, I am a human. And if I have a wound inside of my brain, what do I still have? And I always focus on what does the person still have instead of what do they not have. And our model of disease is all about what are they missing so that we can give it back to them. Well, it was never my goal to return to being the woman I was before. It was my goal to regain her skill sets. But I liked who I had become so much better because my focus was now on the big picture of humanity instead of me, Joe Bolte Taylor, climbing the Harvard ladder and how big is my bank. You know what I mean? So the value structure shifts between these two hemispheres. And I think that because of this experience of a neuroanatomist having a stroke and then rebuilding her brain circuit by circuit, I think that there are some things to learn. So I was so thrilled you called me.
Interesting. Another perspective I've learned. Stop telling patients they're lucky their stroke was on the right hemisphere because their speech is preserved. That's out of the window.
Yeah, because then but speech isn't everything.
Yeah.
Speech is speech. It is important, but speech is not everything. And just look at Alzheimer. I mean, because with Alzheimer, what do we lose? We often lose language. We lose the past, perception, relationships. We lose the future, but what do we gain? We gain the present moment. And generally, many people who are experiencing Alzheimer, if they're not in the fear mode of, oh my God, I'm losing my mind, or I don't remember you, and that bothers me, if I'm in the present moment, I might be fine in the present moment. And no, I don't remember my children, and that breaks their hearts. Okay, but that's them, that's not me. I don't remember my spouse, and that breaks his heart, but that's him, that's not me. And so everybody over there is heartbroken because I'm over here in the present, and I'm actually okay in the present. So how do they, I encourage people say to me, my mom has Alzheimer's and she doesn't know who I am anymore. What do I do? And I say, well, go in and, if she's laying in bed, just kind of like go sit next to her, go sit with her, and then just kind of grunt. It's not about words. It's about interaction and grunt. And what people have come back to me is if they're willing to actually go in and just be like playful infants with no language, language often will come back online. It will often stimulate, because then the person is peaceful in the presence of you. And if there is any memory or any circuitry that can rebind back to you, these amazing moments come when they're aware. It's beautiful. I mean, this brain is just this beautiful thing, and looking at the brain and how to communicate with people, I think we can do much better.
A lot of perspectives and lessons in your book. And at the end of your book, the recommendations, I think I lost count of recommendations for the healthcare and for the public. What would you say, I mean, if we're going to pin it down to 3, what would you say are the most important lessons you want a reader to take from the book?
I'm in here. Come find me.
Okay.
I'm in here. Come find me. And if that means I don't get language, then don't use language. If that means movement, I can't move, then don't use movement, but trust that I'm in here. Come find me. I think that's number 1, because it's kind of like, the first assessment is, oh, are they even in there? Of course I'm in here. Is my language in here? Maybe not. Is my anger in here? Maybe not. Is my love in here? Maybe not. maybe. Come find me. Trust, I'm in here. I think that's number one. Because as soon as you do that, now you're open to me at my speed. And then it's like, focus on what I can do, not what I cannot do, and grow what I can do. Focus there. And that's the way the brain's organized. You know, it's organized in related ways. That's how it differentiated in the first place, was there's a group of cells that says, oh, I can see, I've got visual cortex, and I have ears that can hear, and I have auditory cortex. But as soon as you cover my eyes, then the visual cortex, they're reaching over to the auditory cells and saying, well, we got nothing going on here. We got no new stimulation coming in through the eyes. What are you doing? And can we help? Right? Because that's how brain cells are. So I think it's just so important to see what I am and what I might then be able to grow into, instead of coming in and just following your recipe of right and wrong and good and bad, because I don't have that. When I'm relearning, when I am engaging with you, when I am growing, yes. I'm working and I'm working and I'm working and I'm working, and then I plateau. And during the plateau, this is when our insurance companies in the US come in and say, well, she's not growing anymore. She's not climbing the ladder anymore. She's not learning anymore. And so now she doesn't qualify for more insurance. But what happens is that, and this is with anything, this is about sports, this is about academics, this is about studying organic chemistry. You know, this is, you learn all these details. And then you have to have a time where you just stop bringing in the new and you start to integrate and master what you have brought in, so that it becomes a single package of knowing and being and understanding. And then you can learn and build on top of that. It's like building a pyramid of knowledge. But the plateaus are a good thing, because when you reach the plateau, now it's time to integrate for mastery. And I think that people say, oh, she's not learning anymore. She hit a plateau. She's done. And it's like, hello, work with me, not against me.
So to value the plateau, which is
value the plateau.
So yeah, that's a different perspective of the plateau, from being something negative to something positive.
Exactly.
We've talked a lot about the areas that need improvement. What do you think are the gaps or the uncertainties in the area of stroke or brain science that we can potentially fill in?
Prevention. You know, we as a society, we just typically don't have much respect for our brains. I mean, look at the drugs we use, look at the alcohol we use. We overall don't have a societal respect of our brain. And it breaks my heart when I see kids who are binging on alcohol, and I know that it's a poison and they're just killing their brain cells. It just breaks my heart that their experience of reality is so horrible that they want to poison themselves and poison their brains and kill their cells. We just don't have a fundamental appreciation and value for this beautiful organ. And I think that that's, you know, when I look at what is the purpose of my life now, and what is the one thing that, if I could do anything, would like to accomplish, is helping people really recognize the magnificent beauty of what we have going on inside of our head, whatever it is, so that we nurture it, and we nurture it with foods that it cares about. We pay attention to sleep. Sleep is critically important for the health and well-being of our whole body, but of our brain cells. And getting exercise. I mean, movement gets blood flowing through the organism, and this organ needs like 20% of what you're pumping. So go pump, you know. So I think that's I'd like to see that shift.
Yeah, I think modern science is more towards what can we cure rather than what can we prevent. Okay.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, but if we lived healthier lifestyles, don't we think we would have different numbers of problems?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good perspective.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about your second book, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it took me till 20. So I gave the TED Talk in '08. I had the stroke in '96, took 8 years to recover. I published the book in '08. And now it's 2024. And in 2021, it took till then to figure out how do I really communicate what I believe to be true about what I learned through the eyes of a scientist in order to help others have less anxiety, to have more peace in their lives, to better manifest the lives that they want. And I'm a neuroanatomist. So in Whole Brain Living, that's the name of the book, Whole Brain Living, the anatomy of choice and the 4 characters that drive our life. So what I found when I lost my left hemisphere and I was living in the peaceful euphoria of the present moment, I was a very different character profile. I was connected to the bigger picture. I was big as the universe because that's what those cells do. And that's all I had, right? So that's what I felt. That was my mindset. And then as I became a little stronger and I could actually move my body again, I still had the ability to experience things. What does it feel like when I am put in water and I feel the pressure of the water against my body and I feel wet? So the part of my brain that could understand what is wetness. So this is experiential. Well, that's a group of cells inside of my brain. That's the limbic, emotional, experiential tissue of my right hemisphere. And so when the left hemisphere skill sets kind of solidified and I reached that plateau of integration, these 2 very distinctive personalities came back online. And one was and again, what is in that left hemisphere is me, the individual, Jill Bolte Taylor, my ego. So now it's about me again. It's not I'm big as the universe over here in the right hemisphere. It was me, the individual, and temporality of time. So I had a past, I had a future, I had linearity across time. So my pain from the past comes back online, and that's a personality. Right? This is where my pain is. This is where my trauma is. This is where I'm discontent. I'm unhappy. I'm rageful. I love you conditionally. All the emotions based on the external world of right and wrong and good and bad, because that's what's going on in that left hemisphere. And then the left thinking rational brain is that language, the ability to mastery of language and expertise and details and 1 + 1 = 2 and, rational organization of the external world and the definition of what is right and wrong and good and bad based on the societal norm. And now how I take me and stick myself in those rules or outside of those rules. And, I'm a human, right? So we have these 4 very distinctive profiles, groups of cells that manifest these profiles. And so for me now, I know that 3/4 of my brain, it's very healthy. The whole right brain, it's right here, right now. It's not unhealthy. For me, it's not about my trauma. It's about curiosity and openness and connection to all that is. And then my thinking rational brain, it's healthy. It's thinking. It's not about my trauma. My trauma is in my pain from my past. So if I have this trauma from the past, then I can focus on it, but it's only going to grow. I mean, isn't this 30 years of psychoanalysis in our lifetime? And it just grows and grows and grows, and it never goes away. But if I can train myself to know really well these other parts of my brain, then when I start feeling that character 2, what I call character 2, sadness, I can have my left thinking brain, which I call character 1, come in and say, is there anything I can do? Is there a phone call I can make? Do I need to extract you from this conversation because it's bothering you? What can I do to fix it, right? Because that's what our rational brain does. Or I can move into my, what I call character 4, the right thinking portion of my brain that is just love. And my love part of my brain can come in and hold and nurture the character 2 part of my brain that is my pain, and I can self-nurture. Gee, what a concept. And then I got this little character 3 portion, which is the limbic portion of my right hemisphere that is curious and interested and playful, and it can say to my pain, hey, when you're done with that, let's go play. You want to go do this? You want to go stomp in some mud puddles? So how do we purposely pull our own energy into the healthier parts of our brain so that we can manifest a whole life? And then how do we get these different parts to communicate with one another so they're all strong, they're all healthy, they all thrive together, they all have relationships, and we don't have any personal conflict anymore because we know what that personal conflict is between which parts of our brain. It's simply differentiation of our brain. And we haven't done this yet as a society. So I'm very excited about it. It's whole brain living. It's I think we're already out in like 21 languages, and people get it because it's really. But again, this is very different from the physical trauma of a neurological disorder. This is what I consider for the worried well. You know what that is, the worried well. Those of us who are overall well, but we have this worry, and we're so, how do we manifest all of that together? But when you have a real physical problem, it needs to be addressed, but it needs to be addressed with love and patience and on the timetable of the brain that it needs to do the recovery.
I don't know if I'm paraphrasing it correctly, then, to move away from just a unidimensional person to multidimensional, because
Because we are. So don't you want to know who those parts are? If you go to your wife and you say, if you're married, or your husband, whoever that other is, you go to your other and you say, okay, Dr. Jill says I've got this rational thinking part of me. Yeah, we know that part. Okay. And Dr. Jill says, I've got a part of me that's, it's my little wounded self. Do you know that part of me? And the spouse will go, oh, honey, yeah, I got that part of you. Now, as she says, oh, yeah, I got that part of you, that's her character 4. And as her character 4 is now coming in and nurturing your little character 2, or she's going to come in and go, oh, yeah, I know that guy. He's an ass. So now her little character 2 just met your little character 2. And little character 2s in relationship will never find resolution. They simply won't, because they're both wounded. And so somebody has to step out of the pain and move into one of the other parts of their brain in order to shift the dynamic of the relationship. So what that means is there's not just 4 primary characters inside of me, but in any relationship, there's 8 of us. No wonder we have such a hard time with each other. I mean, it's like, but wouldn't it be nice to actually have a manual on how to understand this so that we can actually recognize and honor all 4 characters in each one of us and figure out how to love one another and support one another during our most painful times?
I might have to bring you back to discuss that book.
I would love to. I think it'd be a really dynamic this and that because I don't get to talk about my stroke of insight very often because it was a long time ago. And you're a neurologist, so you're looking at the brain through the eyes of a physician who actually isn't just interested in and curious about the brain, but you want to help people. Absolutely. And so what does that mean if to the person who is way over here in disconnection from your ability to understand how to help me? So I'm so grateful for today's conversation, and I'd love to back that up with what did I gain because of that experience that I'm now on the big picture sharing on the world stage.
I think yeah, I would like to see that integrated. So I will get a copy and digest.
Perfect.
Well,
perfect. You'll love it.
I'm sure I will. You've already.
Yeah, you'll love it.
Finally, you've made one book recommendation, which is The Master and the Emissary. Do you have any others you would kind of want to recommend, either about the stroke or brain or anything of that nature?
Yeah, my other favorite is by a physician. He's a psychiatrist at Harvard, and his name is Frederick Schiffer, Schiffer, and his book is called Of Two Minds.
What is
In
of
fact,
two minds?
of two minds. So he's a psychiatrist who has found different ways of isolating right hemisphere. So here's an example. He's a psychiatrist at Harvard. So let's say you have a young kid who whose grades are good enough, and he goes to Harvard. And he has a mother who has just constantly doted on him, and he has a father who it's all about achievement, all about achievement. And so this kid is a high achiever, and he's got a mother who dotes on him. And so let's say he goes to Harvard, and now he's, exploring women, and he's exploring alcohol, and he's exploring, campus life. I'm out on my own. I'm my own guy. And in the beginning, I'm working hard, and my grades are good. But what happens in the middle of the semester, or in the last third of the semester, where now all of a sudden he's completely disconnected. He's not performing well. He has fear. And so essentially the portion of his brain that he has nurtured, and his parents have nurtured for so long on performance, that was doing really well. But now he's more into a self-doubt. He's not doing so well. And Dr. Schiffer uses different parts of the brain to identify which part is more well than the other, and then trains the less well part to be nurtured by the more well part, so that, and he's managing psychosis. Now, I don't manage psychosis. Again, I'm not an MD. I'm not a physician. I'm very respectful of what are my boundaries and what I'm doing. But I love this guy because he's so aware of different ways of looking at these different mindsets, and how we can really create our own conflict. Yeah.
That's of two minds. That's interesting.
Of two minds.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds, well, the title is already fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'd start with of two minds.
Okay.
Yeah. Start there. That's
Master.
my, okay. Well, my other favorite one is called The Primal Teen.
Okay.
The Primal Teen by Barbara Strouch. Strauch, I think is her name. Barbara Strouch, The Primal Teen. What I love about this book is that, boy, does it look at all the research around preteen, teenage, and the development of the brain, and what's actually going on with that neurological development during that decade or more, really more, of our natural development. It's beautifully done. Boy, is it an eye-opener for parents. I really encourage people to get that, The Primal Teen.
So that's one to look at.
Yeah. And she was a journalist. I think she was like a New York Times journalist or something like that. She had excellent credentials for really doing that kind of research.
Dr. Jill Bolte, thank you very much for participating in this episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. I feel honored, and thank you very much for your time. And to my audience, thank you very much for listening or watching the podcast. After reading Dr. Taylor's book, you might want to read my own book called Surfing the Brain, which talks about neurology generally. And if you want more hard stuff neurology, I have a website called Neuro Checklist. And to make sure you don't miss the next episode of the podcast, why not subscribe to the iTunes, YouTube, or Spotify channels? But for now, thank you very much for your time. And Dr. Taylor, I'm very, very grateful for the time you've given me today.
Oh, I'm so grateful too. It was wonderful. Thank you.